So, what would you say is the most common thing that holds up a contract agreement between a club and a player?
Um, there's no end to problems or can be problems. Uh, a lot of the time, I would probably say that that's an easier question for the agent to answer because what happens when I usually tend to get involved in transfers and renegotiations is what tends to have happened is the commercial negotiation is probably already finalized. So whilst the commercial heads of agreement have probably been agreed between agent, club, player, etc., it's only at that stage that I will come in to go through the various elements of the deal, to go through particular parts generally, and then do some advice on particular laws, particular regulations, to see how the agents and everything else stuff works. So that's the general approach that I'll tend to take. And so there's always tons of stuff that can hold up deals, but ultimately it just depends on lots of other stuff. But ultimately, when I get involved, it will be because the deal is probably about 90% of the way there. Now, what can sometimes happen is issues can arise in the meantime where players don't want to leave, particular monies and bonuses aren't necessarily going to be paid. There might be issues over what the agent's fee or how it's going to be paid and structured over a particular period of time. There may be things to do with image rights and boot deals which need to be arranged, or previous commercial deals which need to be ironed out. So there's always tons of things that can go wrong, but usually when I tend to get involved in deals, things commercially are probably about 80 to 90% of the way through.
Yeah, and you sort of talk about the kind of the specifics of the agreements there. What kind of specific incentives are there that both the player and an agent are looking for in a deal specifically?
Well, yeah, it's a good one as well. I guess from a player perspective, there can be lots of things. It can be the sporting journey or project. It can be maximizing, his earning potential or her earning potential over a particular period of time. It can be because they want particular, exposure to a certain market. It might be that they want playing time because they want to break into a national team, for example. And it might be because they really like the coach. It might be because, like Liverpool, for example, they're champions and want to be playing with other elite players. It might be that other players want more of a challenge or other things. So the player side can be, absolutely multifaceted. On the agent side, ultimately, the agent is at all times acting in the best interests of the player. The agent's idea effectively is to ensure that really they can maximize probably the term of the deal, i.e. the length of the contract, because obviously the longer the deal, the greater financial security the player will ultimately have, mixed with, is it the right project? Is it the right manager? Is it the right club? What is the playing style like? What is the leadership style like? What type of dressing room are they going into, etc. So it's those types of variables probably too, I'd have thought.
Yeah, and you sort of speak about agents there. We'll go on to that a little bit later because I've got quite a few interesting sort of questions on that side of things that you deal with. Just a bit more of a fun one here. So, what's the strangest clause that you can remember seeing in a player's contract at any particular point?
Well, as you guys will probably know, I've always got to be a little bit careful about breaching confidentiality because otherwise I'll probably get sacked and no one would ever want to employ me again. But in Done Deal, there's loads of quite cool examples of reports that were in playing contracts. One of the best that I saw and I still like to this date was Stefan Schwarz's contract, which included a clause which effectively said that he wasn't allowed to go into space. And apparently that was because an eagle-eyed club secretary previously had read that one day he would like to go into space. So they tried to future-proof his employment contract to ensure that at least he didn't go into space during the time that he was a Sunderland player. And there was another great clause, but with a player called Neil Ruddock that might be before your guys' time, but he
Razor
was
Ruddock, yeah.
Razor Ruddock indeed. So he, when he was playing for Crystal Palace towards the end of his career, I think it's probably fair to say at different times of his career, he probably went through different levels of weight gain and loss. Played very well, had a very good left foot, played well for Liverpool, scored some important goals. But apparently they included a weight clause in his deal, which effectively stated that if he went above a certain weight, that part of his wages would potentially be deducted. Now, it was quite ironic in the end that apparently he couldn't end up making his debut because they couldn't find a pair of shorts big enough for him to actually wear. So, yeah, I don't know whether that's an urban myth or not, but I certainly like the story, if nothing else.
Brilliant.
Moving on to transfer fees, are there any parts of transfer deals that we as fans don't really get to see?
Or almost all of it is the truth, because if you can imagine sometimes that like a transfer is a bit like an iceberg, that you see the end bit and the glory bit, which is this was the numbers, these are the wages, this is the thing, why does it have to take too long for the deal to happen, etc. But usually the bit under the sea level is all of the stuff that's happened before the announcement is made, which is sometimes the 2 or 3 years beforehand, where the agent's building the relationship with the right chief executive and the scouts and the technical directors, and understanding that maybe they'll need a right back in 12 months or maybe it's 18 months, and then your client might be available but the current club wants to keep him for another particular period of time, etc., etc. And then the opportunity potentially arises, but there's a gap between the transfer fee valuation and how much they want to pay by way of wages. And then, another 6 months passes, and then there's more of a negotiation with the consent of everybody, and things start moving. So the truth is, usually what goes on before the transfer announcement is probably about 99.9% of the hard work. And although fans seem like, or suggest sometimes that it's almost like, why can't the deal be done and why does it take so long? When you're talking about potentially 50 to 100 million pounds worth of liability in terms of transfer fees, agents' fees, wages, image rights deals, etc., it can sometimes take some careful negotiation.
Yeah. Who from a club is directly involved in a decision to make a transfer? For instance, are there certain clubs, without asking you to name any names, where you've seen a first team manager has very little or no influence in a transfer, and the majority of the decisions are made from higher up in the club?
I think the truth is, from my side, is I don't tend to see too much of the sporting decision making occurring. So, I will sometimes be liaising with the technical directors, the chief executives, the chairman, sporting directors, who are effectively conducting the negotiation that I'm maybe assisting the agent with in different ways. Now, will it be the manager that's doing the negotiation? Almost certainly not. Nowadays, especially for the elite clubs, further down the pyramid, that's probably certainly the case. But in the sort of bigger deals that I tend to get involved in now, there's in-house legal counsel, there's technical directors, and there's football directors or whoever else it might be with those particular responsibilities. So I think it's rare at the elite level. It might well be that the talent identification job is done between scouting, technical director and manager, etc. But in terms of then the negotiation that occurs, it's usually with the technical teams as a result.
How frustrating is it for you when a deal falls apart at the last minute? And does it impact your relationship with a club or player in any way?
Yeah, it's a really good one. I mean, I think ultimately, I just want to make sure that the deal doesn't fall apart because of anything that I've done. And a lot of the time, you've got to be careful of the sensitivities of the relationship between the player and the agent, the agent and the club, and the player and the club. So there's always different things to look at. Ultimately, when you're dealing with quite a lot of difficult legal concepts, you've got to be able to, as a lawyer, be a decent communicator and a good enough communicator to explain the consequences of certain clauses and particular things that might crop up. So, I haven't, thank goodness, had too many deals fall over the line because of things that have happened because of me. Sometimes it can be that the commercial deal doesn't stack up. It could sometimes also be that the buying club's negotiating with a couple of teams at the same time. And that player might just be one option that then falls away if a certain possibility doesn't occur. So, ultimately, I know that I've got to look after the ultimate interest, which tends to be my relationship between the agent and the player, and making sure that usually is as strong as it can be.
I'm also just sort of quite interested at what point, because you sort of say it's near the end, but is there sort of a specific point at which you're called in to deal with a player or an agent or a transfer that's happening? What sort of point do you there then come into?
It depends on the client and the agent sometimes. My most difficult one is when the agent will phone me and say, "Oh, Dan, we're concluding a deal this afternoon at 5 o'clock," and it's 3 o'clock, and then they'll just say, have a quick look over the docs. But then, that thank goodness doesn't happen too regularly. And what I'll tend to try and do is go on the journey with the agent in a player of, this might be happening this week. Okay, have we got this through? What's happening? Have the terms been agreed? What's the general approach been? Have we done things previously, etc., etc. So, on the whole, I prefer as much preparation, as much lead-in time as possible. But sometimes when either the agent wants to get things done quickly, or it's actually been quite opportunistic, and then a deal comes out of nowhere, then you've sometimes just as a lawyer got to be reactive enough then to jump on and then do as good a job as you can.